So the first thing I want to do is give some context to what it is we're talking about curating free and open resources. So I'm assuming a lot of folks are here today because you're interested in finding and exploring new resources, the new educational resources, instructional materials. So that's certainly the first part of curating, is going out and seeking out what's available, what open educational resources, what free resources can we find on the internet. But what we're really focused on in the makerspaces and what we're going to be spending time talking about today is our process of evaluating. And so when we're talking about evaluation, we're looking at the range of resources that we pull back and looking at them in terms of the quality, the usability, and other characteristics that we're going to dive into deeply today. And from that, inevitably, we have a pile of resources that are good and maybe not great for our learners, but maybe in another context. And then really what we zone in on are the resources that meet the quality and usability features that we're looking for. So once we get those resources, and then we call them kind of repositories of resources. So that might be something like Khan Academy, where you've got a range of different activities that are part of the resource. What we do then is align those resources. And so what alignment really means is we organize the resources and tag the activities that are within the resources to desired topics or skills. So for example, as I mentioned a moment ago, Khan Academy, maybe that's our little green block here. So when you go onto a site like Khan Academy, you see all kinds of different activities. You see maybe videos, and then there's some quizzes, and then maybe some other materials that students can read. And so when you first come upon that, it's almost like when you come across a new search on the internet. You need to figure out how that's going to work with the work you're doing. And so then we spend a lot of time in our makerspaces aligning those activities to various frameworks. And we're going to talk about that once we get to that section of the presentation today. So just kind of keep a mental map of this. This is what we mean by curation when we talk about it. So why is it important? So Jeff, this is a term and a phrase that Jeff has brought back from some of the presentations he's seen, and it's something that also guides our work. When you go out onto the internet and it's great that we have all these choices, but a lot of times it's too many choices. It gives us too many decisions to make. And unfortunately, we have less and less time in our day to find things that work for our learners and our context. So it's great that we have lots of choice, lots of free and open resources are out there. But as I'm sure many of us can appreciate, that choice comes with overload. And how do I know which resource will work for me? And so the things, again, that we are focusing on are the resources accurate? Are they relevant? Are the accessibility features there? Are they things that we can align? And so that's what we're going to be spending time on today. So our evaluation challenge within the makerspace, and apologies to those that are in the makerspace, this will definitely look familiar to you as we start going through. The first thing we focus on is choosing the best resource. And so with that comes the baggage of, well, what do we evaluate? What makes a resource best? What makes it quality? What makes it usable? And so we spent a lot of time talking through that and thinking through what that criteria is. Kind of paired with that, what are the evaluation protocols? So once we decide what it is we're going to be looking at, how do we go out and use the volunteer help that we have within our makerspaces to collect that information and collect that data? And so what I'm going to be doing in the next few slides is talking about our process, talking about the forms we use, the guides we use to evaluate, as well as what our protocols are to do the evaluation. So hopefully, again, this looks familiar to some of those that have joined us in our makerspaces. When we started out this project, we spent a lot of time polling our makers. Again, these are educators who are in the field of adult education, spent a lot of time finding and using resources with learners. And we asked them kind of a simple question: what's important to you when you're going out and looking for resources? And so feel free to use the text chat if any of this kind of jumps out at you, or if you see things that aren't, or you have things in your mind that aren't on this slide or in following slides that are important to you, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we can consider them as things we should be looking at in the future. But just in general, take a peek at this. And this is a Wordle. So these are aggregating all the different words that came in from the educators and putting them into context. So if it's was repeated several times, it would be bold and large. So look at some of these. They're, first and foremost, looks like folks are interested in interactive resources, things that are easy for their users, learners to use and to navigate. Accessibility is an important consideration. And so these things are, these are characteristics and features of resources that tended to be repeated. And so when we then went out and looked out in the universe of other types of rubrics and evaluation protocols folks were using, we were looking at other types of quality and reusability factors that people suggested. And we came across, for example, the Achieve rubrics. Maybe this is something you've worked on in your past work. We also went out to a lot of libraries who use a lot of open educational resources and looked at what types of checklists that they used when they were coming up with their rubrics for evaluating and assessing the quality of open educational resources. And through all that work, and then like I said, kind of comparing and contrasting ideas with our makers, we came up with an evaluation guide. And so if my lovely colleagues could put a link of this evaluation guide in the text chat box, that would be great. And I'll go through and kind of explain to you what these various sections of the evaluation guide are. So first and foremost, we looked at credibility, next relevance, learning and support features, accessibility, and finally openness. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the guide. And so as you can see, it's gave you an access denied. Did it work for you? Does that work for others? I see that Erin said she was having trouble opening it. Okay, yeah, if you could sort that out, Jen, that'd be great. So if you guys get the link out. So here's the evaluation guide. And if once you get the link working, if you click over here in the upper right-hand corner, this is like a template. And so when you click on it, it will give you the opportunity to save a copy of the evaluation guide for yourself. So here's the credibility. And as I mentioned, there are various factors that come into play when we're talking about all these major headings. So for credibility, for example, looking at the reputation of the author, production quality, and so forth. Here's relevance, learning and support features, accessibility, and openness. So let me hop over here. So let's go ahead and drill down and look at one of the examples for credibility. So again, here's the snapshot of what we're looking at: the reputation of the author, accuracy, production quality, promotion. And so, for example, promotion might be looking at the extent to which the resource promotes some type of product or service. So for example, one of the resources we looked at was a resource from Bank of America. So even though they're providing information on financial literacy, one of their motivations for putting out this information was getting you to potentially sign up for a bank account or a checking account or a savings account. So those are the types of things we were looking at from promotion. Cultural sensitivity is getting into things such as cultural bias, stereotypes, and so forth. So let's take a peek at an example that was one of the resources we reviewed in our first makerspace. This is consumer.gov. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And if, again, one of the lovely colleagues could put the link in so people could have a chance to look at it. So this is a financial literacy resource. It's from the Federal Trade Commission. So if you look up at the top, it's a .gov, just to give you a sense of, who's behind this resource. And as you click around, you can see it's, again, financial literacy focused, managing your money, credit and loans, what debt's about, scam and identity theft. If you click through to some of these, you can see that they're mainly readings, but once you're within the document, you can see there's also the ability for the person who lands here to listen to it. So if language is an issue, reading is an issue, they would have the opportunity to listen. And then there's also a toolbox in here that has lesson plans, videos, and so forth. So the idea within our evaluation protocol is we would look at our evaluation guide and then start poking around and looking at all the various sections of the website. So notice here too, they also have a very detailed and explicit privacy policy. So this gets into what is happening in terms of data use. And I'll talk about that in a second when this comes up within our evaluation protocol. So going back to our example here, looking at the sections of the evaluation guide, reputation, accuracy, and so forth, this is a pretty good resource. It's coming from, again, a governmental source. So you can feel pretty good about it being from a high quality reputable source. Kind of tied with that, the accuracy should be pretty good. Production quality look great. Links aren't broken. They aren't really promoting any products. Cultural sensitivity, that's getting into any type of bias. Nothing is really present that we could see. And then, as I mentioned, regarding privacy and security, it's very transparent. You can see what they're doing with the data that they might be collecting if in any place on the website they are collecting data or using data. And so here's another example then, an example B, where it's called, it's a different website called Learn to Earn. And as the reviewer went through, they noticed that anytime there was an image, the images were broken. And so this was an opportunity then for that reviewer to talk about production quality. And so, for example, if it's a chart or it's something that's kind of crucial to what you're looking at, that would really impact the ability of the learner to be able to effectively use the resource. So that would be an example of where the reviewer helped us to understand what the production quality was, and was something that actually I believe we wrote off to this website and mentioned to them anytime that they had the images that they were broken. So what we're going to do now in our breakout, I was able to go through with the time that we had today and talk about credibility, but we'll have time within our breakout to talk more specifically about these other factors. So relevance, learning support features, accessibility, and openness. So that's kind of a teaser for the breakout if you choose to join me within the breakout after Jeff has a chance speaking. But now I'd like to just kind of pivot and talk about how we use the criteria within our evaluation guide, and use that as part of our evaluation protocol and the process where we have our makers help us to complete these evaluations. And we complete the evaluation using a Google form to collect our reviews. And again, hopefully someone can put the template in, and hopefully we won't have the issue where the link is broken. You should again see something similar to what you saw on the Google Doc, but this will now be the Google form. And what's nice about this is you're going to be able to have the opportunity to not only view this Google form, but you can also save the template. And what's nice about that is that we've given you permission to edit the form in any way you might want to. Maybe there's different things you want to look at and adapt it specifically to your use. And then you can also then, by doing that, have others collaborate on a project maybe that you have within your organization, and you're able to collect your own data and analyze it. So what I wanted to do is, as I conclude this talking about our protocol, is just give you a little peek at what we shared with our makers at the end of our evaluation. So we have, over the summer and then this fall, have completed about 110 evaluations of resources. And so what you can see on this slide, what I'm showing here on the ratings, if you look at the evaluation form, you'll see that there are ratings between 1 to 5 for each of these 5 characteristics that I mentioned. Again, credibility, relevance, learning support, accessibility, and openness. So what was interesting to us and made us feel pretty good is that for the most part, the credibility scores were quite high, which is great, credibility and relevance. Where things started to fall off a little bit were in terms of learning and support features, and then accessibility and openness. And so from that, we were able to kind of drill down and see, well, where are things falling out? Where are some examples of issues as folks were looking through the resources as they were evaluating? So as I mentioned before, privacy and security would sometimes creep up, so that the website was not transparent in terms of how the data from users was collected or potentially stored. In terms of relevance, some of the issues that would come up from time to time would have to do with cultural relevance. So for example, a lot of times we'd see some great resources from Canada. So some of the references were not necessarily things that would be familiar to folks in a different, say, United States or other places in the world. And then in terms of learning and support, and this is something actually Jeff is going to be able to drill down when we get into his section. A lot of the times you'll see great information, much like I just shared with you on the section for the consumer.gov, a lot of great information, but not necessarily things that we would consider scaffolded learning experiences. So some of the supports that you typically have as part of instruction were not present. When we talk about accessibility features, a lot of times you'll see some great videos, but for example, they won't have closed captioning. And then we're talking about openness. The things that would tend to come up was that the technology choice that was used would not allow someone who was coming afterwards to be able to take that resource and amend it and use it for their purposes, or maybe it's part of a portfolio of resources that had copyright, lockdown copyright, not something like public domain or Creative Commons, to be able to take that resource and make revisions to it as you wanted to. So some of those key takeaways then that we found from, again, this big pool of resources we looked at is the great news was that a lot of credible and relevant resources are at our disposal, are at our disposal. However, as I mentioned, a lot of it was content heavy, lacked engagement, maybe not a lot of opportunity for feedback for learners on their progress. We found through looking at things that the learners and the context mattered. So the evaluators would, as they were reading through it, saying, well, might work for some audiences, but it wouldn't work for these learners. It might not work for my English language learners, where it might work for, say, a high school equivalency type of, GED prep or something like that. Likewise, as I mentioned, just because it's available doesn't mean it's accessible, meaning that there could be issues with closed captioning, clear language and navigation. Maybe it's a distracting website. Lots of ads are coming at the learner that's kind of getting in the way of the message of the resource. And finally, free does not equal open. As I mentioned, even though it's available and free on the internet, that doesn't necessarily mean we have the ability to do anything with it. So the big picture takeaways then are, we have this roster of really high quality resources that we can do our alignment, which Rachel will talk about in a moment. And then we also then have this opportunity to take some of these resources that are open, and we have the ability then to adapt them or potentially create new resources to make them reusable as part of the open educational resources, which is what Jeff is going to be talking about in a moment. So with that, I just wanted to kind of give you a context of where we're going to go when Rachel's going to walk us through some of the alignment activities. So as I mentioned, this curation process, we've explored our resources, we've evaluated them, and now we're able to take the activities within the resources and align them to our frameworks.